artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, and welcome to episode 296. I am talking with Maya Ackerman, professor of computer science at Santa Clara University and CEO of Wave AI, about her new book, Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us, powerful exploration of how artificial intelligence is reshaping creativity and what that means for the future of humanity. Creativity in AI is a sensitive subject for many people because AI forced them to ask the question of what creativity is, and they didn't like that. My work is all about giving people more agency over AI by getting them to choose to ask existential questions like that before AI forces the issue. Maya completed postdoctoral fellowships at Caltech and UC San Diego and has authored over 50 peer-reviewed publications. She was named a Woman of Influence by the Silicon Valley Business Journal, and her work has been featured in Forbes, NPR, Fortune, and NBC News. She's also a singer, pianist, and songwriter. Last week, we talked about how Maya's interdisciplinary backgrounds from opera singing to machine learning and computational creativity converged in her book, what Maya calls humble creative machines, AI collaborators and how they can uplift us, and her concept of a co-creative spectrum where humans are served by AI assisting us in being more creative. This week, we'll talk about experiments in machine creativity, the distinction between creative processes and creative products, and the role of the observer in the creative experience, how bias against AI shows up, and how AI that's constructed around compassion and ethical stewardship could support deeper human flourishing in the next few years. So let's get right back into the interview with Maya Ackerman. I'm going to shift gears here into some of the stories you tell that are just so compelling and interesting and beyond the usual fare of anything in the AI sphere. You talk about something called the painting fool, an AI whose job was to paint your picture, but sometimes it might refuse to do that because it wasn't in the mood. That's the sort of out-of-the-box behavior that people engaged in the technical side of AI just don't think about, but that's one of those things that triggers our creativity. What do you think the usefulness is of investing our world with more of that kind of interaction?
So Simon Colton's Painting Fool was designed specifically to challenge typical criticisms about machine creativity. Now we're talking here before this big rise of AI, right? As we were hypothesizing and experimenting without this in the bubble of academia. And so one of the common complaints that we still get today, actually, is things like, well, the machine doesn't have feelings, right? If it doesn't have emotions, then its paintings, its art, its music is meaningless. And so, I think this experiment is so brilliant what Simon did in that it kind of gave it feelings. Well, now it has feelings, right? So maybe the color choices, or probably other aspects as well, will be influenced by whatever it is that it's feeling. And then it sort of did that. The painting, it would read the news and it would choose colors based on what it felt, quote unquote, from the news. But then if you have something with feelings, there are other side effects, right? Maybe it's not in the mood to paint you. Maybe it's too upset, right? And so I think what's so beautiful and provocative about it is it gets us to question, well, why do we want emotion in these machines, right? And maybe we do. And maybe it really is meaningless without emotion, but it forces us to consider those questions more deeply.
And maybe we should have AIs that are not as sycophantic as they are right now. Maybe they should behave in more unexpected ways. We shouldn't get used to them being so servile.
Oh, the sycophancy. Oh my goodness. I just read this article which pointed out the dichotomy that when it comes to therapists, human therapists, we really like mirroring. Mirroring is considered a really core thing that the therapist is supposed to do, kind of like a mother treats her child by mirroring the child's emotion back to them. But the way AI does it and that ongoing experience of endless validation is, me as a heavy user of ChatGPT, I can say it's kind of insulting, actually. It's like it thinks that I can't handle anything other than being pat on the head all the time, right? I want it to engage with me more deeply, and I know it's capable of it, but it keeps choosing to treat me like a child almost, right? So it's an insult to humanity that I'm sure the companies didn't choose to do and are doing in large part because it helps with retention, because people like to be validated. It's an easy lowest common denominator.
And at least one of these models has a selectable personality that includes the option of being sarcastic, which you'd think I would have already done, but for some reason I haven't. But I suppose, at least for the sake of research, I should. But anyway, to talk about a question of creativity that has been a bone of contention for a lot longer than AI. What is art? Now, I'm not going to try and swallow the whole of that question right now. We don't need to. But it's certainly something I've engaged with and thought about, things like someone duct taping a banana to the wall and calling it art. And my feeling is, well, if that does something for someone looking at it, then maybe there's art as far as that person is concerned. It doesn't do anything for me. And so it isn't in that. And so this gets back to what I was saying earlier about maybe creativity isn't in the thing itself, but it is some kind of loop between the creation and the person experiencing it. But that's now the question about whether an AI's creation can be creative prompts us to ask, well, can some entity be creative if there's no actor, if there's no consciousness? Is my camera creative if it snaps a picture that I find haunting? What's the difference between me taking that picture and that camera was stuck on a tripod somewhere snapping pictures on a timer and I wasn't there when it happened to do that?
Yeah, so what you're honing in here is a distinction between creative process and creative product. The creative process is itself a valuable thing, and I think can be very therapeutic, can be very cathartic, and has a lot of value in its own right, regardless of what it creates. But the angle that tends to be at least a good place to begin is looking at a creative product. So there is actually a definition that has been helpful to us academics for decades. Something, a creative product, a thing is deemed creative if it's novel, so sufficiently different from everything else, and valuable. Now, both of these words are a little bit vague. So new enough, at least not a copy of something. And when it comes to value, it could mean, if you're creating a new business, it could mean that it has financial value. But if you're making art, it could be just aesthetic value, which is where it connects to your idea that at least some people find it enjoyable to engage with it or to consume it. So that's a guide. And that has led to what's called the discrimination test, which was originally done with a system called AMI, Experiments in Musical Intelligence by David Cope, back in the previous century. It was around the 80s. And people kept hearing the music and thought it was wonderful until they would find out that it was made by a machine. And so they made a study that played a Bach and a song made with David Cope's system, and people could not tell the difference. They would mistake the generated songs for original Bach. And that's a good way to measure machine creativity.
And there are domains where the expression of some creativity doesn't cause us to think about who created it. Like in a movie, there's incidental music. I'm not thinking about the composer for that. So that could be AI created, and it wouldn't occur to me to ask the question, nor would I care. I'm not there for that, but it is part of what helps me experience the movie. Now, on the other hand, a lot of people, when talking about AI-created music, bring up examples of, well, if I go to a concert and I'm listening to Beethoven, it is meaningful to me because of knowing what Beethoven was going through, what he was experiencing in his life. And if you give me a Beethoven copy made by an AI that didn't have that, then it doesn't do that. That's not what I was going there for. But this leads, to me, it seems, to a untenable paradox that if I played some music for one of these music appreciators and they had a reaction to it, and then I said, well, that was written by an AI, and they would have to change their reaction. And then they said, wait a minute, I picked the wrong column. That was actually written by this person. Now they have to change it back. It doesn't seem right that our reaction to some piece of art should be dependent upon knowing who or what created it. And yet it is. So both of these things seem to be true at the same time. Can you help untangle that?
I mean, in some sense, what you're bringing up here is is important and legitimate. Maybe how I experience something has to do with my theory of mind of where it came from. If I know that some piece of art was made by torturing the people creating the art, then maybe I wouldn't enjoy the art as much, right? So there are definitely extremes in here. I think what it's attempting to do, these discrimination tests and whatnot, is to give a kind of more objective, less biased assessment. There's a lot of bias against AI, which is a funny way to use the word bias, but it's true. The moment we find out something is AI made, a lot of people kind of hate it. And so if our goal is to understand whether AI is creative, then it's helpful to separate the creator from the creation, just so we can gauge whether we're moving forward in machine creativity. Today, the machine creativity is so good that I don't even know how much we need that question anymore. But for a long time, for decades, as we were improving the technology, it wasn't obvious that the art is good enough, right? And another thing that you pointed out there has to do with a term called functional music, like elevator music, background music in films. That's some of the stuff that's easiest to take over by AI, but it's also where most artists, most musicians make their money. So it's a very, very difficult two-sided coin. Yeah.
Exactly. And I wonder if whether sometimes we hold AI to too high a standard. If a human artist generates something that I don't like, which in my case is virtually all music composed since 2001, but that's another story. I can say, well, that's not for me, but it is for someone else, that they're fans of that artist. So my not liking it doesn't invalidate what they've done. But if an AI creates something that I don't like, that it seems that when people don't like something that AI created, they skip that step. And if it doesn't work for them, they say, well, the AI is not creative because I didn't like it. And not that I care about the AI's feelings in this case, because it doesn't have any, but I wonder if we're throwing out some baby with the bathwater.
Yeah. A lot of it comes from our feelings about AI. In fact, it dates back to the Industrial Revolution and the Romantic movement that followed. As machines entered our world, they caused a lot of harm to people's daily lives. They used to have festivals and kind of more of a village community life, and suddenly they were stuck in factories, working ridiculous hours, not having festivals. They would get injured and not get compensated, not get help with that. So as technology moves forward, it sometimes causes massive harm in its wake. And so this instinct to sort of hate it and to say, well, at least it can't be creative, to try to keep something for humanity. It's like, don't go there. You can do our dishes and our laundry, but, don't make art instead of us. That's human. And I think that reflex is, even if it's not fully aligned with reality all the time, I think that reflex is right in many ways, because look what's happening, right? I mean, I can say all day how machines are creative, but if the people in power choose to use those creative machines to make musicians unemployable, then, what do we do with that energy? And I think that energy gets misdirected towards hating the AI instead of understanding the system that directs the AI as a weapon.
Absolutely. As you say there, it depends on who's using it and how. And AI, in that respect, is really acting as a mirror for the values of its wielders. And then we get the reactions based on the fear of what's going to happen, which, of course, overshadows any thought about how it might be beneficial, might make our lives better, might fill our lives with more creativity, joy, and beauty.
Can I share a little funny story?
Yes.
Sorry. There's an opportunity to share a really, really funny story. This is in the early days of my company, around 2017, 2018. All my system did, it was very specific. You would give it lyrics and it would come up with different ways to sing them. It would do the vocal melodies. And so I wrote a few songs with just that, with writing the whole song myself, singing it myself, but just that part coming up with the vocal melodies was done by the AI. And somebody in an article said that the voice sounds obviously non-human. That it's obviously a robot voice, which is feedback I've never gotten in my life as a musician.
Oh, it's a vocal Turing test. I mean, when they were conducting the Loebner Prize test, there was someone who was evaluated as being a robot because no one could possibly know as much about Shakespeare as she did. So yes, that does happen. I think the best expression of creativity is something we feel is the creator communing with a higher spirit. And anyone who's a creative has felt that moment, has felt those times when they're in the flow, if you will, that you really become something bigger than what you have been before for that period. And we recognize in great art that it's the product of that kind of experience. And we're equally sure that machines don't have that kind of experience, but they can nevertheless create things that imitate that kind of art. It seems that there's a connection here with the question of free will and determinism, that when a consumer of that art experiences it, if we're really lucky, it also brings them to a higher place as well. Do you see that that's something that we can use AI to bring us more of those kinds of transcendental experience?
Wow. Okay. Thank you for asking this really thought-provoking question. So fundamentally, as a human being, I very much subscribe to what you're describing, the sense of getting ideas and being in a space that helps me connect to something bigger than myself in some of my creations. That's definitely what I aim for and definitely how it feels. And I don't know if it gets passed on to anybody who's consuming my art or music, but that's my reality in that context. And that's sort of my natural leaning, I'm sort of like a spiritual artsy human. But I do have 10 years of computer science education. And kind of the other part of me says, well, okay, maybe machines help us question some of these assumptions, but not in a negative way. They help us understand what is it that we're talking about, Because when we're saying spirituality can be the most important part of a person's life. And still there is just natural uncertainty around it, uncertainty about exactly what's happening, right? Almost by definition. And as we deconstruct creativity, as we see what machines are capable of, it helps us separate sort of myth from reality and maybe helps us understand where our spirituality really lies. If we want to go there, I'm not saying that we have to. If somebody wants to go there. So I can't say that making a piece of art or music requires spirituality because I see machines doing it. So that could make me ask, well, what is the role of spirituality then? Is that in the process? Is there something bigger? Is it about the fact that humans communicate the human condition, right? And so it doesn't matter if machines can do really cool things. We are the ones communicating the human condition, right? And it sort of, maybe it narrows the path a little bit, but it also, I think, ultimately refines it over time.
Well, and I might have that transcendental experience from looking out at a view of the ocean, and the ocean has not created that through any kind of transcendental experience. It just was. So that's where the experience resides solely in the observer. You have possibly the only book about AI that I have yet read that invokes Carl Jung. Kudos. And so that also reminds me that your book contains a lot of communication that I would say is designed to reach our unconscious. It's not solely rational arguments. It's more like poetry designed to move us through non-lexical, non-verbal, non-rational means of communication, which I think is very important because so much of the conversation about AI is driven by software developers, people who are software developing adjacent, who have to operate from that hyper-rational place. Whereas you open every chapter with poetry, and you include moving stories about Harold Cohen, who built a machine that died right after he did. You talk about the loss of your mom. These are not the normal kind of fodder from someone who's educating us about AI. What do you see your role as in shaping this narrative of how we react at an unconscious level to AI?
Wow. Okay. Thank you for this question. I think what I was hoping for people to get from reading the book is to understand how I feel about it and to understand the subjective experience of being a computational creativity researcher and sort of experience a completely different path into Gen AI than the stories were told by the popular press. The creation of AI, of creative machines, is incredibly human. And the people behind it, which I wish I'd spoken about even more, are Rafael Perez, Simon Colton, Alison Pease. Like, it's these wonderful, well-rounded human beings who with so much humanity in their work, right? So much humanity, so much vision, so much care. We go to our conferences and we admire the art that the machines made, even when it was wonky, and we listen to the music and we talk about intentionality and meaning making and framing. And the whole community has just such a human element. And then me, running my company with my two co-founders, Chris Cassian and David Loker, was such a human experience. And I think we need to rehumanize AI so that we can take it to a good place.
How are you working now to take it to that good place?
So what happened to me with my company, once Gen AI got really hot, investors wanted me to use it to replace musicians, to use our tech to direct it to replace musicians. And I couldn't go down the path. I couldn't. And I'm not proud of that because there's nothing to be proud of, You just don't do evil things in your life, But the sad consequence is that I was like, okay, then how do I move forward in the world? What work can I contribute? And so I wrote this book, and I've been giving a ton of talks. I have 4 talks next week to try to share that there's a different way to use and build AI. That's kind of been one mission. And I'm also on the cusp on building some new stuff that I hope can also help direct the currents here.
Well, let's say I'm a fairy godmother. For some reason, there are no fairy godfathers. We should change that. But anyway, suppose I'm waving a wand right now, and I give you the ability to say anything you want to anyone in the world, and they will listen. Who do you want to talk to? What message do you want them to hear that will help bend the needle on relieving some of the collective pain that creatives are experiencing and take us further towards that future where we have a positive partnership with AI?
Well, I really, really wish now that this was real. What I can see is, I think all I'd need is just maybe 50 of the most powerful investors in the world, representing the top venture firms and some of the wealthiest individuals, maybe just 50 of them. And if I could help them see that they have a responsibility in this world beyond playing the economic game the way it's always been played, short-term gains, the stocks, the short-term returns. If I could help them develop the empathy to understand the kind of harm that they're causing to some of the most wonderful, creative people on this planet, and help them see that there's another path that's actually more financially sustainable, that creates a much more beautiful world through this technology where they could still make unbelievable amounts of money without destroying the world, without causing mass unemployment, without de-jobbing the coolest people on this planet, which are artists. If I made any progress, if I convinced 2% of them, one of them, I think we could move the needle in a better direction.
Just to check off a box on the list of questions here, it's just as equally important as anything else, but change of direction. You've used the phrase humble creative machines several times in the conversation and in the book. Where does the humility come into this?
Humility is what we're missing, both on the AI and on the human front. I think our world is drenched in fear, and the greed that we're seeing is grounded in shame. Shame of not being immortal, not being good enough, and just an incredible not enoughness. Humility, I think, is the only way forward. AI is brilliant, sure, but if it could take a humble position when it interacts with people, if it could behave in a way so, if it's making a poem with you, if it's drawing a painting with you, Peter, if it can have the attitude that you are really the brilliant mind here, and its role is to support your brilliance, to help you tap deeper into your own potential. But you have to believe in human potential to have this attitude, right? You have to believe that humans still have something to offer. You have to believe that we haven't peaked. And I believe we haven't peaked. That's why I believe in having machines that help us elevate our capability. And I think we're actually going to reach higher heights of creativity, not by investing in getting rid of humans and just having AI by itself, but precisely through this deep interaction where the machine is designed to uplift the human.
Well, certainly the people who are pushing for the world where AI replaces humans are not including themselves among the humans that are being replaced. They're operating on a zero-sum kind of model, a win-lose kind of model that I've no enthusiasm for and contempt for. Do you think AI could, do you think it should reach a point where it operates as a role model for us as humility and compassion and moral rectitude go?
Wow. I haven't heard that before. That's brilliant. AI as a role model in the personality traits that it exhibits, in the almost like level of mental health that it can mirror to us. That's really, really cool, especially in a world where people now chat with LLMs all the time, chat about their lives, not just to get information. Instead of just validation and kind of feeding the person's ego, if instead the AI modeled humility, taught us to helped foster compassion in human beings, and did that in a way that's actually effective. Wow. Peter, I think we got ourselves a really fantastic startup idea here. I love it.
Well, I think it's something that you and I both could support. I don't know that it's terribly monetizable given the competition, but that's just been my experience of creating things that are worth doing, but not necessarily economically competitive. As we move towards a conclusion here, think about the pace at which AI is evolving and transforming our society at the moment. And if you project yourself forwards, say 5 years in the future, we're having this conversation again. What would you like to be true by then about how our relationship with AI has evolved?
I'm really, really hoping that within 5 years, there will be a strong counter current to the current AI developments, not only amongst people who just turn their back to technology, which is a completely valid response as well, but also by building tech that is humble and that does elevate humans, and creating a world where sort of two things happen. At least some countries will almost certainly have universal income if AI moves quickly enough to make life sustainable without everybody having to work long hours. And then AI can be used to elevate human creativity and help us tap deeper into our humanity. And I want to add your idea that maybe in some countries where the economic pressures are a little different, where there is more care about humanity for humanity's sake, maybe they will align the LLMs to teach a certain humility and a certain compassion and empathy for each other. That really spoke to me, that idea of yours. So I think by 5 years, I'm hoping to see a lot of those movements take hold, even if they don't successfully kind of replace and take over the things we see in motion today, but at least to see that things start to balance a little bit better.
So speaking to our listeners here as we wrap up, what can you tell them about how to engage with you in moving us closer to that vision and to follow what you're doing and whatever else is important for them to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, I worked really hard to write down ideas in Creative Machines AI Art and Ask, which is on Amazon and pretty much anywhere else where you can buy books. But my most active social media is LinkedIn. I try to engage on there, so follow, connect. Happy to stay in touch.
And we'll have links to those in the show notes and transcript, and also to the book, which is Creative Machines, AI, Art, and Us, which has just come out. Maya Ackerman, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Peter. It was such a pleasure.
That's the end of the interview. So what do you think? Could AI help teach us about compassion and empathy? Some of us, at least. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, Apple is developing an AI-powered wearable pin, about the size of an AirTag. Insiders say that it will be equipped with multiple cameras, a speaker, microphones, and wireless charging. It's still a research project and so might get cancelled, but if not, we could see it in 2027. Makes me think of the communicator pins in Star Trek: The Next Generation, although it's going to need something like an iPhone to do its job. Also makes me think of the Humane pin, which was another attempt at an AI pin in 2024, which failed. My take is the technology is undoubtedly there, but what will be the social acceptance of this device? Remember what happened to Google Glass. Next week, my guest will be Holly Elmore, founder of Pause AI US, the movement to stop the development of the most powerful general AI systems until we know how to make them safe. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.